Hey gang, it's your old buddy Platt, and today I'm going to show you how to make watermelon wine. So let's go. So if you've been watching the channel for a while, you know I like to make all kinds of things. Home brewing, beer, making of mead, cider, homemade or prison wine, what have you. And so I'm always looking for inspiration. Well, there's a gentleman named Tom T. Hall. It's the classic country singer. I don't believe he's with us anymore, but he had a song about watermelon wine. You may also know him as the gentleman that had the classic I Like Beer song. So definitely someone us drinkers can appreciate. Well, anyway, that's all I needed. When I heard him singing about watermelon wine, I'm like, we've got the technology. I know I can do it. Just let me find a recipe, and I found a good recipe. Let's go over what we need to make that recipe. We need, obviously, first watermelon. One large watermelon will do for this. We're making a 1-gallon batch. Here in Nevada, off-season fruit, I don't necessarily get the best selection out here in the desert. So I've got one medium-ish size watermelon, and then one like personal size watermelon. That should equal one large watermelon. I'm going to need sugar. I need roughly 3 pounds of sugar. Now, I can hear you out there yelling right now, 3 pounds of sugar? Are you insane? Diabetes, da 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 da. Remember, when we add sugar to a lot of these things, the sugar's not necessarily for us, it's for the yeast. That's what the yeast needs to produce alcohol. So if you want alcohol in this, you're going to need to add sugar. All this sugar that we're adding is not necessarily going into the glass that we drink, so don't freak out. Now, that being said, this is designed to be a sweet wine. So if you want a drier wine, cut it down to 2 pounds, pound and a half, what have you. But we're going to intentionally make a sweet wine. But again, a lot of that sugar is going for the yeast and not for us. Because we're adding a lot of sugar to this, we're going to need some yeast nutrient. Also, because we're producing a wine, but we're not using wine grapes. Wine grapes are a little more balanced. If you've seen any of my wine series, you know I talk about acidity in wine, and that's important for balance and complexity of flavor, whatever. So we have, at your local brew shop, you could find acid blend, or you can find it online too. I'll leave the link down below for the yeast nutrient and the acid blend if you don't have a homebrew shop nearby. And then finally, we're going to use, I'm going to use a champagne yeast. You can use a regular wine yeast. You can even use a beer yeast if you have it. Or if you're, again, somewhere where you don't have access to a brew shop or what have you, you could also use bread yeast. The taste is not going to be as good, but you can use it, and you've seen in other experiments I've done, like with basic cider or basic mead, you can use bread yeast. And then finally, you're going to need a couple of different pots, and then you're going to need a sifter or whatever, because we're going to filter out any pulp or seeds that might be in the watermelon. So now that we got our inventory out of the way, let's make some watermelon wine. So the first thing we're going to do after we sanitize all our equipment, if you've never done any home brewing or don't know much about home brewing sanitation, I'll leave a link to a video up here about home brewing sanitation. I've got my fermenter and my hydrometer, other pieces of equipment, my airlock, all right now in the sanitizer. So while I'm doing that, I'm going to prep the watermelon. Watermelon-wise, one of the questions you may have is seedless or with seeds. Most people like watermelons with the seeds. They think it's a better melon. We're going to end up filtering it, so don't worry if you bought a watermelon with seeds. What I had access to at my local grocery store was seedless, so it kind of saves me that time, but it's not that big a deal either way. If you have a personal preference on melon, feel free to go with that. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut off the ends of the watermelon. We want to take the rind off. We don't want to take off too much of the kind of meat of the melon. And we're just going to cut, like I said, a little bit off the ends. Yeah, that's probably a better cut right there. And then we're just going to cut the rind off the sides, and then we're going to, after we carefully cut that rind off, we're going to cut into cubes, and then we're going to throw in our pot. So, and after that, we're going to bring that to medium heat, and that's going to help break down. That watermelon's kind of a half liquid, half solid state. Well, that's going to break down the watermelon in the heat. And after we get it liquefied, then we'll filter water. So, but anyway, I just want to review the melons and the prep on the melons. So let me get done cutting this up in cubes. I'll get everything thrown in the pot here, and then we'll come back to discuss the process once in the pot. All right, so we got our watermelon all cut up into roughly 1 by 1 or 2 by 2 cubes. And we've thrown it in our pot, and we now turn on the heat to about medium. And what's going to happen over the next roughly 30 minutes, maybe a little less, is this watermelon's going to break down and liquefy. Like I said, it's kind of in a half solid, half liquid form already, but the heat's going to help break it down. You'll notice over the next few minutes that this will break down. If you have like a potato masher, if you've ever made homemade potatoes, you use that. Or I've got a little handy spoon, and when things start warming up, we'll kind of help the process along a little bit. You don't have to, but like I said, just helps the process along a little bit. After we've got everything broken down and everything liquefied, we're then going to run it through our strainer, put it in another pot over here. If you have any excess juice left over, let's say we end up with more in a gallon, I would suggest siphoning off or separating the extra liquid and adding either vodka or some good bourbon to it. It's probably the best use for it. If not, if we end up with a perfect gallon, that'll work out just fine. So let's break this down, then I'll filter it, and then we'll come back after we've filtered it and liquefied it. We'll come back to add the sugar and again continue on the process. Okay, so we've went ahead, cubed or cut up our watermelon. We put it on medium heat. It kind of liquefied for us. We then filtered it out after it broke down. I think I said 30 minutes earlier. It took me a little over 30 minutes, a little bit longer, but it may vary, again, depending on the watermelon you get, what have you. I ended up with roughly a gallon of juice, and now I'm going to bring this back up to a simmer. We're not going to boil it, but we're bringing it up to a simmer because we're going to now add the sugar. And if we make the liquid hotter, that sugar dissolves easier. Like I said earlier, the reason we're adding sugar is we've got to give the yeast something to eat. There's not a ton of sugar in watermelon juice. And also, too, we're wanting to make a sweet wine. You can adjust, if you don't want it that sweet, you can adjust down to 2 pounds instead of the 3 we're going to use. Also, in case you get any ideas, hey, how about some brown sugar or some honey, agave nectar, whatever, I would advise not to. Normally, I would encourage you to explore, try whatever. Watermelon is not the most intense fruit or intense flavored fruit, and can easily be masked by brown sugar, honey, molasses, whatever. So I would go with just a simple cane sugar for this one because we don't want to mask the watermelon flavor. So that being said, like I said, we're bringing it up to a simmer. And I'm going to go ahead and add our 3 pounds. This is a 4-pound bag, but I only got about this much in there. Just add it all at once. And I'm just going to keep stirring this up and let it till it gets up to a simmer. And then we're going to let it cool off, and then we're going to put it in our fermenter, and then we'll add our yeast nutrient and our acid blend there. So let me get all that sugar mixed in, and then we'll come back and get everything in the fermenter. Alright, so we've got our 1 gallon of watermelon juice. We've got it filtered. We've got it cooled down. Now it's time to add our yeast nutrient and our acid blend. If you've never used yeast nutrient before, not sure what it is, anytime we make a fermented alcoholic beverage, wine, mead, cider, whatever, and there's a lot of sugar in there, or what's called a high gravity, think of like a barley wine if you produce beer, really big IPAs, double porters, stuff like that, or meads, whatever. yeast are going to have to work a lot with all the sugar that's in there. And so we like to add yeast nutrient on these high gravity projects. Just did a gravity reading on this. It comes out at 1.130. To give you a general idea, your regular pale ale or lighter ale, light lager, you're looking at like 1.04, 1.05. So we got a lot of potential alcohol in here, and our yeast are going to have to work pretty hard, so we're going to give it some yeast nutrient, about a teaspoon of yeast nutrient. Just a little tip, if you do not have access to yeast nutrient, one little trick you can do is throw in raisins. Something about the skin of the raisin. I know there's also some dead yeast on the skin. Some people will use that to start the fermentation. But the skin of a raisin will help out fermentation. And so you could substitute that. As far as acid blend, I'm not 100% sure how you can substitute the acid blend. This is only about the second time I use this, so I haven't found a substitute for the acid blend. So we got both those in there, and we'll give you a little trick too. When dealing with these high gravity solutions, you will want to give it a good shake. Again, the yeast are going to have to do a lot of work. So besides adding the yeast nutrient and the acid blend, we are going to give it a good shake. This is going to help oxidize. If it was beer, we'd call it wort. We're oxidizing the wine or the juice, and that's going to give the yeast something to work with. Now, after fermentation starts, you don't want to do this. You don't want to keep stirring it up. I have seen in recipes, and if you look online for recipes for watermelon wine, you'll see some people talk about every few days give it a stir because you'll have a head on top. Don't do that. Once we get the fermentation going, let it be. Also, too, speaking of fermentation, several of the recipes and sites I looked at on watermelon wine, I could tell these were folks that have not brewed anything before or whatever, because a lot of them were suggesting that you would throw in the yeast and then after 3 or 4 days, you would move to a secondary. If you know anything about fermentation, that's just too fast. The bubbles slow down after the first few days, but it really takes at least a week or so to let a majority of the fermentation happen, and that's what you want to do before you transfer into a secondary fermentation. So what we're going to do here is when I add the yeast, I'm going to let this sit here for 2 weeks in primary, and then I'm going to move to secondary, and I'm going to let that sit for about another six weeks there, and then after roughly a 2-month period, we'll be ready to bottle. I've read some recipes where they're like, after 1 week or a few days in primary, you move to secondary for a month or two, then you move into a third fermentation for another 2 or 3 months. I don't know if we need those steps. I think a secondary fermentation for about 6 weeks, and then we bottle, and then you can let it condition. Some suggest, and quite accurately so, that you would, after each week, you would do a gravity reading, and once you got down to about 1.00, then you would be done fermentation, ready to bottle. You can do that if you like. I know a lot of you don't have hydrometers, so I'll make it a little bit simpler. Like I said, we'll just do 2 weeks in primary, 6 weeks in secondary, and then we'll bottle. And then you can let age however long, every once in a while trying a bottle just to see how it ages. Well, hope you liked this video, and if you did, please subscribe down below. Also, please like the video. That lets YouTube know we're putting out good content. Any questions, comments, or concerns, please leave them in the comment section. Also, if you're looking for the yeast nutrient acid blend, I will put a link down below on how to get that. Like I said, also, if you have any, like I said, other comments or anything, you can also contact me on the Twitter page. Well, until next time, bottoms up.